Hey guys, it's Dan here with a new video, and today we're going to be talking about this. So this is my silicone arm, and it's supposed to look like there's scales on it, and I have it colored similar to like a fish. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to look into some upsides and some downsides, some things I did right, some things I did wrong, what you can fix and change if you're going to do this. So let's get into the build. Flatten out. Oops. Okay, it should spin a lot easier now. So we repeat that step until it's 3-ish layers thick on all sides. I don't have my microphone on, so I'm sorry about the audio, but this is where we're at. We're gonna let this all dry. It's about the same thickness all around, and it should be strong. I used a piece of silicone, or at least I think I did, on the bottom of this, but it was obviously too small. So I'm gonna have to make a new cardboard top for this. That's no big deal. So once we get all this off, we're gonna take a heat gun, melt the plastic a little bit, pry it out, and get all that out there. If you're doing this yourself, other than that, I'll fast forward to when that is, because this is gonna take a little bit. Well, it doesn't stick to the silicone. That's the whole point. It's just all the other stuff it stuck to really well. So this urethane will stick to anything that's not silicone. So if you're doing this, make sure you got enough silicone. All right, so I mainly got it cleaned off. This stuff grabs a whole bunch. Since I 3D printed mine as a thin vase mode, I'm going to take it out with a heat gun and pull it out. You want this stuff to cure for 24-48 hours before you do anything crazy with it, so I might wait a whole day before I do that. Once you've done this step, whatever you molded it with, you can take it out of the inside after it's cured for a day or two, and then we will see how this is going to work out in the next steps. So we flipped it inside out, and you can see it looks a little wonky. So if it's extra thick, like there's a drip right where the thumb is on the outside, which is now the inside. And this looks a little wonky because these are still not trimmed perfectly. So once we get this all trimmed up and get any drips trimmed off, so it's relatively flat all around, it should open up and be about exactly the shape that it should be. The silicone we're going to mold to this doesn't really care if it's going to be like that, because it'll stretch and conform back to your arm. So if you are able to trim any drips before you flip it inside out, that would be ideal. So I'm going to try to trim some of those and trim this, and then I'll get back to you guys. We have this shape. It holds its shape pretty well now. I ground out some of the stuff, made it all even, and if you can't tell, I got some old clothes in there, stuffing it up so that way it holds its shape sturdily when I'm trying to shove stuff over the top of this. You'll find out in a little bit what I'm talking about. So you can see the details. There's a couple bubbles, but if you do this more carefully than I did, then you shouldn't get too many of those, but look at those details. All right, so I'm going to take the silicone in small batches and paint it on top, and then when I'm done with that, I'll show you the next step. So this is the shirt I'm going to bond the silicone to, and see how this is the thumb poking out, but this is inverted. So the inside line is where the stitching is, where the thumb's going to be the most. So you want to line this up, you want to put it on your arm so you can visualize what it is. Then you grab so that the thumb's right here, you're going to grab that, and then pull the shirt over it so the outside of the shirt goes on the outside of this. So that way when you flip everything inside out, the outside of this becomes the inside will be on the outside of this. I know it's a little complicated, but this outside surface is going to touch that outside surface, and then the inside will become the outside when you flip it all out. You have the scales on it. I hope that makes sense. And you're going to do all that once you have all this cured and you have a extra coat of silicone wiped on it, and immediately before it cures. If you couldn't tell in that time lapse, I decided to put the silicone on the sleeve instead of on the arm itself, and you are probably glad that it was muted because I was yelling and screaming at it seizing up, not working. So let's not do it like that. Although if you do it like this, it makes it so that there's silicone already bonded into the fabric, and the next step will hopefully help. But just let's just skip this step and go straight to just adding silicone to the outside of that, and then you pull the cloth over. Okay, so you know what we're doing. We're taking the sleeve off, and I'll reveal to you really soon. You might see some stuff, you might not. I'll try to get it in shot. I'm going to take the stuff out from the inside. Okay, there's that out. Alright, so I have it stuffed with some clothing, just so that way you can see what's going on. We can see that it was moderately successful. Some parts failed and some parts didn't, but that's something I can address really soon. So we can see that it bonded mainly to the fatter part of the arm, and it's got errors right here. So if you do have some parts that come up, that's an easy fix because we're going to be using some Sil epoxy. That's going to bond this to the cloth. We're going to be doing that by stuffing it like I did, so that way we can apply a little bit of tape to hold it firmly to there. When the glue is dry, it only takes about 12 minutes or so. And the next thing is we're going to not use cotton as the material or a dark shirt. So let's talk about that real carefully. The cotton doesn't stretch nearly as much as it should. So if you get like a 4-way stretch material, like an Under Armour shirt or something like that, that's going to work a lot better. And it's going to make it a lot easier. If you couldn't tell, it was a real struggle getting the cotton to stretch around this. And the next thing is we're going to cast it thicker. So this was cast thin. You can sort of see that the shirt's black underneath it in some parts. And just to get over that, from one of my previous failures, we're going to cast it about that thick. And that thickness makes it so you can't see what's underneath it. So you really can't see what's underneath it. And this really shows the scales as if they're like part of like a skin texture. So that's really good. So those things we're going to do to fix it, we're going to cast it thicker, make sure it's about that thick. We're going to not use cotton, and we're going to not use a dark shirt. So I'm going to get this video out to you guys now and not do those changes because I don't have any more silicone left. But if you guys do it the way I'm telling you, you're not going to waste as much as I am, so you're going to be able to do just fine. So let's talk about failures and learning from lessons. So this is the first casting I made, but it was from a different kind of mold. This mold is a hard outer mold that doesn't flip inside out, and I cast it by rotocasting, pouring silicone in here, and it let me get it all nice and even and all that. Then I pulled it out and tried to stretch this over the sleeve itself. So that is when it ripped in half, because this silicone, it might be stretchy, but it does rip. If you get a small little rip on it, it will continue to rip. So that led me to making a mold I can flip inside out. Now this mold works because it's made out of a flexible material that is called KX Flex 60. KX Flex 60. So this stuff is a urethane that is pretty rubbery feeling, but it doesn't stretch like silicone. So it's only pliable, it's not flexible. I'm probably using the wrong words. But after you make it with this stuff, which is pretty key, that you use something very similar to this with a durometer. I think it's a durometer of 60. Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's a durometer of 60. So you're able to do something like this and flip it inside out. And that means that instead of casting on the inside like a hard mold, you cast on the outside, and then you can stretch the cloth over it. Now, if you're going to be doing something like this, you want this to be relatively even and thin. So when I was telling you that I was sanding it down, I sanded down all the highs and lows around most of the areas, and then I stuffed it with the clothing that made it so it was pretty rigid, and it was able to hold its shape really well. So something like this is almost a one-to-one flip, and it doesn't distort the shape too much. But if you get it too thick, it's going to start distorting shapes, and it just doesn't look exactly like it would. The silicone, on the other hand, I used EcoFlex 00-35 Fast. Now the thing that's cool about this, the Fast, is that it sets in 2.5 minutes. That's the good thing. The bad thing about this is that it sets in 2.5 minutes. So it sets in about 2.5 to 5 minutes. So 2 to 5 minutes is your working time essentially. And if you're going to be painting silicone onto something like this, it sort of gels up and it doesn't really drip all that much. So you have enough time to make it smooth and it looks good. But if you're trying to coat the whole thing and then pull cloth over it, you really have to have a lot more time than just 2.5 minutes, because by the time you're done painting it on, you probably have 30 seconds to get the shirt ready and then pull the shirt over it. So if you're going to be doing this yourself and you're using the EcoFlex 00-35 Fast, that's why I would recommend not using a cotton shirt, because as you saw when I was swirling it around looking like the hair from a hair metal band, I got these part was folded over underneath itself because it got wrinkled, and it was too thin. So if it was too thin and got wrinkled, that means that when I put the cloth over it, it was pulling it too tight. So that's why I really recommend using a material that's like 4-way stretch fabric, like from Under Armour shirt or from spandex, or just like go out and buy the cloth yourself at a fabric store. So something like that's going to definitely help you get a lot better result than what I did. Because if you're able to stretch it really wide and then let it snap into place, instead of trying to slide it in and have it get all mushed up, that's going to be a lot better than what you saw me doing. So those are some mistakes that I made that you guys can learn from, and some really good advice. So this is definitely something you should use. This is definitely something you should use for the first layers. If you want to do a really slow last layer for adhesion and use a different silicone, that's fine. But if you just buy this and just buy this, then that's costs less than just buying this, and then one more silicone. And then also this Silpoxy that I used, that's an extra at $30 if you buy the big tube. You can buy a smaller tube if you're just going to be touching up the seams. Because if you're going to be doing it the proper way that I advise you to do it, then you pretty much only have like the outer brim that you're going to have to put Silpoxy on if you don't want it to stretch away from the fabric. So it's only gonna be this much. It's not gonna be like smothering it in there or anything like that. It should be adhered well enough that you don't have to do that. Yeah, so now that you saw how I did this and you see that the Silpoxy was used, I'll tell you that that worked really well. I did a little bit of chamfer around the edges, but the cotton, even though the cotton's a bad material, binds really well and it stretches perfectly to it. A couple of things to note: if you follow along with the directions I said and don't do what I told you not to do, you should have a lot better result than what I have. So if this was an Under Armour shirt and I had a lot more flex to it, it wouldn't have ripped right here. And if I didn't have a black shirt and it was like skin colored, you wouldn't be able to see through. If I'd cast it thicker, you probably wouldn't be able to see through also, and it wouldn't have ripped. So all three of those would have yielded a better result. But needless to say, even without a better result, with this glove and that jacket on, it still looked pretty good. It was convincing enough for maybe on film or on set. You could take it to a cosplay, to a convention, anything like that. But the other thing that made this a little bit loose is the fact that I 3D modeled this off of something that's not exactly my arm. So I did a 3D model. I found one of a really muscular guy, cut the arm off that model, took a model of a vase that had dragon scales on it, and just pasted that all over it. Then I measured it so it's about the same size as my arm. That means that there's parts of it that don't actually match up to the shape of my arm. If I had an actual model of my arm, it would have looked a lot better because it would be skin tight. Now, if you have a muscle suit, you can put muscles in there and make it so it adheres to that size of that. That's what my friend Henry Creations does when he makes his Thor scale armors. So he makes the whole thing. And he does his in a really cool way because he's a 3D modeler and he's able to do all that stuff. If you're not able to do this, that's what my tutorial's for. And all this actually wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for my pretty recent $20 per month Patreon member, Spicy Fun Dip. Whee! Now I decided to go with that name instead of his actual name, even though he said it was alright to use his actual name, because that name's funnier. Bye-bye, Spicy Fun Dip. Alright, but his money actually let me buy the extra silicone I needed because I ran out twice when I was doing tests on this. And if you're just doing tests, this stuff's expensive. If you're making a prop and you just use it for the prop, it's not that expensive actually. So, yep, all this. I hope you guys liked the video. If you do, please give it a like. If you made it this far, please consider subscribing because we're getting all these numbers up. And if you're really into supporting me, you can look at the Patreon and do something like Spicy Fun Dip did and help me get more materials and all that stuff. And these videos will come out sooner. This one actually took so long to get out because I was waiting for funds to come in and the pandemic made me so I don't have that much money. So it's really good that Patreon helped with that. Other than that, I'll see you guys in the next video.